Well, welcome very much to everyone who has joined so far. I suspect we will have a few more people join us, but it is a very great pleasure to host you. We have a really interesting cross-section I can see from the participants of councils and experiences. And of course, we have fantastic speakers. So without further ado, I will let our Chief Marketing Officer, Sam Johnston, welcome us and introduce today, and then we'll continue to facilitate the proceedings going forward.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Ishmael. And yeah, we're really glad to be able to run this event alongside our fantastic speakers. I know that we're going to get some really good insight from them as we go through this presentation, but equally on the back end of this conversation, we're going to be getting some insight from each other. There's a really great diverse mix of local authorities, local governments, and different organizations that are supporting society through the COVID-19 challenges and through into the post-pandemic solutions that we need to start to implement. So we'll have a couple of breakout sessions that Ishmael's going to be putting forward and running, but really looking forward to seeing what those themes and findings are. Hopefully we can get some actionable learning out of that at the end as well to better put things in place once we're done. But I'm sure that, yeah, I'll catch up with you guys at the end as well. So looking forward to it. Thanks, Ishmael.
Thank you very much. So today we will begin by setting the frame. Obviously, right now we are in a moment of enormous transition. We've just gone past the lockdown and the most acute moment globally in many ways, and we're entering a recovery phase, but we're also having the risk of second waves. So I am going to welcome Xavier Longan to introduce us to the bigger picture. Xavi is the lead for partnerships and operations at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Action Campaign. And so he has a global picture of sort of how this crisis is playing out and what opportunities it also presents from that broader agenda of advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. So Xavi, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ismail. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be part of this panel today. Let me start by saying that yes, what you see behind me is the design of a butterfly, and I will refer to this a bit later on. But I wanted to start by thanking you, Ismail, by thanking BookingLive for inviting me and for inviting us in the UNSDG Action Campaign to be part of this conversation today. We had the chance to meet you, Ismail, as I'm sure you'll remember, and to come across BookingLive during the Global Hackathon earlier this year. This was a global massive exercise where the UNSDG Action Campaign collaborated and helped to co-organize, and which was designed to co-create solutions to tackle the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was done in the very early days of the pandemic, in fact. So allow me to, first off, congratulate you again publicly, Ismail, you and BookingLive for winning the Solidarity in Action category of this global hackathon with the Coordinate-19 solution, and also for being the only British organization to make it to the top 10 amongst 15,000 participants globally, which is no small feat. Let me also say a very quick word about the UNSDG Action Campaign, about who we are. We are an interagency initiative of the UN Secretary General, and we are mandated basically to mobilize and inspire citizens, individuals, but also organizations to take action on the Sustainable Development Goals, which, as I'm sure everybody knows, were adopted by all the member states of the United Nations in the year 2015, with a target date for achieving them in 2030. And we're also mandated not just to mobilize, activate, and inspire, but also to connect these individuals and organizations with decision makers at all levels. So it's not much different in a way to what we're doing today. We're coming together, local governments with other stakeholders, with other institutions, to seek solutions to work together and to connect with each other. Now we have been, since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we have been doing a lot of thinking, as I'm sure you all have, on the challenges that this pandemic poses. But we've also been looking, and I think you mentioned that at the beginning, Ismail, we've also been looking very closely at what opportunities are emerging from the pandemic. What dynamic is the pandemic creating that we can leverage, not just to recover, but to make things better, to do things better, to change the way in which we operate, basically. And we have identified 4 opportunities, which I wanted to share quickly with you today. Now, the first opportunity is that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, started as a political commitment, but they are now urgent, concrete priorities claimed by people and by leaders everywhere. So if anything, the pandemic has shown that the SDGs encapsulate the pathway to more resilient societies and a more sustainable planet. So issues such as decent jobs, social protection, equal access to quality education, health services, also climate change, clean water, all these issues are now top imperatives, top priorities for people everywhere. So it's not an abstract agenda anymore. These things are real, and these things are being demanded by people everywhere. So what we see is that on the one hand, local governments are at the receiving end of this demand, of the demand for action and delivery on these very areas. But at the same time, on the other hand, these same local governments can also, are key also to more directly and efficiently tap onto these new audiences, which are now much more aware and much more sensitive to the goals, to the Sustainable Development Goals, and to what they represent. So there is an opportunity here to work together, to sort of rebuild the trust between the citizens and institutions and work together. Now, a second opportunity that we have identified is that transformative change is now possible. So until recently, the transformative changes required to achieve the 2030 Agenda and the goals themselves were perceived as too costly, too difficult, etc. But with the pandemic, what we're seeing with COVID, with the impact of COVID-19, we're seeing that there is a debate that is being fueled, and there is a momentum with the potential to achieve and even accelerate a global transformation. Now, local governments and their constituents have an opportunity now, which we didn't have before, to reimagine our societies, reimagine our economies, reimagining our governance, to realize not just short-term gains, but also long-term commitments to human rights, to sustainability, and to mutual benefit. Now, so at the local level, from safe cycle routes across cities, sustainable building projects, to the digital transformation of citizen engagement, so that local services are accessible to everyone, necessity has made the public sector creative. And this creativity, we feel, must be nurtured to outlive the crisis. So in short, what I'm trying to say is that business as usual is no longer an option. And that takes me to the third opportunity, which is that through a butterfly effect, individual action can unleash tremendous power. And that's why I have this butterfly behind me, because we have seen that the COVID-19 response has shown again and again, consistently, that the impact of individual action and individual behavior in addressing complex global challenges can make a massive, massive difference. So we've seen how by taking individual action, be it physical distancing, be it washing our hands, be it staying at home, by taking individual action, people in many countries all over the world have managed to flatten the curve and save millions of lives. This is very important because we as a campaign, we advocate for individual action, and we've been advocating for a long time on the power of the individual, the power of the crowd to really have a global impact. And now I think that the COVID-19 and individual action in terms of contributing to flatten the curve is the perfect illustration of that, how local action can have this global impact. Also, around the world, people have inspired and comforted each other with simple, spontaneous acts of solidarity, of heroism that are sustaining lives and communities. So again, this illustrates with stark clarity that local action can have global impact and that local level policies can play a pivotal role in changing global trends. Now let me refer to the fourth and final opportunity, and I'll start my conclusion here. The fourth opportunity we have identified is that global solidarity, again, is no longer an abstraction, just like the SDGs, but it is now an imperative, a priority for people everywhere in their daily lives. So a spontaneous solidarity movement is emerging. I think there is little question about that. Now, this is lifting hopes that more unites us than divides us. And that also links up with other social movements. And we've seen that with Black Lives Matter in the States and other movements that where there is an undercurrent of solidarity, of helping each other. So that can all work together for a better world. And channeled well, this movement is a very powerful force to respond to the pandemic and to advance local and global cooperation grounded in the values of global cooperation, of multilateralism, universality, and interconnectedness. So local governments and local stakeholders from all sectors can jointly affect change by leveraging this momentum, by riding this wave, basically, this solidarity wave, and supporting local institutions to the current challenges. Now, the crisis is showing, in our view, that there is a turning point at hand, that we are at a crossroads, and we need to leverage this turning point for people and planet, where the recovery efforts can be guided by the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda, and can be inspired by local action and local stakeholders working together in solidarity. That's why we're inviting local governments everywhere in the UK, but also all over the world, as well as individuals and organizations, to join the Global Week to Act for SDGs this September, at the occasion of the General Assembly, but also at the occasion of the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations and the 5th anniversary of the adoption of the SDGs. We aims this global mobilization precisely at showing that we're stronger together, and also that we want to demand a just and sustainable recovery. Let me close by thanking again you, Ismail, by thanking BookingLive, and also by saying that I'm truly honored to share this sort of virtual stage with the Deputy Mayor of Bristol, Asher Craig. We are aware painfully of how much the United Kingdom has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, by the COVID-19 crisis, the high toll that the pandemic is having on the UK. And we sincerely hope that we can draw inspiration and strength from the resilience and strength shown by cities and citizens in the UK. And as I said, I hope that we can together contribute to a just recovery for people and planet, with the SDGs at the center and leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Xavi, for a really interesting frame. The fact that actually we are part of a global process and that there is an interaction between this global awareness and this global movement and what we do in cities. And I think that interaction between our institutions and our communities has become incredibly crucial. And obviously the Sustainable Development Goals allow us to have some sense of direction as to where we move this to address the challenges. So thank you for framing that. And I am extremely happy and thrilled to welcome now Deputy Mayor, Cllr Asher Craig from Bristol City Council, to give us actually an illustration of how that looks like, what that looks like sort of as a case study. And I think I don't envy the political leaders of local authorities at the moment having to suddenly react at speed. And yet I think there is a lot of inspiration to be drawn from this, and that the topic that Xavi raised, that this crisis is also an opportunity, I think may be demonstrated by the next account. So thank you very much, Xavi, for your participation, and welcome, Asher. I will let you share your screen so you can take us through your presentation. Asher, you are muted at the moment. You are,
yeah.
Fantastic, there you go.
Hi. Firstly, thank you very much, Ishmael, for inviting me to be part of this BookingLive webinar. And thank you very much, Javier, for your introduction. I was making lots and lots of notes as you were writing. So one of the things that I will say is that I'm really proud of the fact that Bristol is not an inward-facing city. We are an outward-facing city, and I think over the last 4 years, our Mayor Marvin Rees has really put Bristol on the map globally. And I am very proud of the fact that I think we were one of the first local authorities in the world to actually undertake our own voluntary review into the SDGs. You may have seen that. And the SDGs are what underpins everything that we do in the city across all of our partners, including the local authority. So we just published our statement of intent on the recovery of the city. And again, it's embedded in the SDGs. And that is what is going to kind of drive us forward in terms of the recovery agenda. But I'm here today to kind of talk to you guys about what we have done in Bristol. And just before I go into the presentation, I just want to quickly set the context. It's been quite a strange experience actually having to go from normal, what is now the new normal, but I have to take my hat off to our city and our partners of how quickly we actually adapted. And I think the reason why we have been so successful in the way in which we have responded to the COVID-19 outbreak is because of all of the work that we had done around the One City approach and the One City plan. The last 2.5 years, we have been developing and working hard on the partnerships and the relationships that we have across the business sector, the public sector, and the voluntary and community sector. And it stood us in good stead when we stood up Gold Command, Silver Command, and we just got into action. And it also said a lot about the trust as politicians that we also had for our own senior leadership team, who, you know, sometimes decisions had to be made and decisions can't, you know, haven't got time to necessarily have that conflab or use the processes that we have within the local authority. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned about as we look at the new normal, and we're looking at that at this moment. So I wanted to set the context as to how great, how we started. So my screen is disabled. Wanting to share mine, could you? Okay, just about to. Okay, great. There we go. And slideshow. Right, okay. So how did Bristol transform our digital response to COVID-19? Well, first and foremost, we needed to think about how we were going to communicate with the city. I've got the enviable responsibility of leading on both communities, equalities and public health. So I was very much at the coalface of everything that had been happening, and having to work extremely quickly and efficiently with our Director of Public Health and the Mayor in terms of getting information out of the door. So part of that involved weekly press conferences and radio phone-ins by the Mayor and our Director of Public Health. We have been producing citizens' newsletters that have been sent out twice a week to communicate the key public health messages and sources of support that were available. We also have something called the We Are Bristol helpline, and we've had nearly 14,000 calls have been completed in relation to that service. So anybody from across the city could phone in if they needed help with shopping, if they needed help with food, isolation, you name it, we provided it. We also provided, up until this week, weekly briefings and webinars with all of our city leaders as part of our One City approach, businesses, and that includes not just the usual suspects, but one of the things that we have done is started to have conversations, particularly with those businesses who have been really impacted. You know, the food businesses, the events, arts and festivals, and they have been so successful that they want us to kind of continue going forward, because they really feel now that they're very much a part of the city and involved in the decision making and the work going forward. We also have facilitated weekly webinars with the voluntary community sector as well. Okay, I missed volunteer response. So one of the things that was really helpful for us is that we had something called Can Do Bristol, which is an online digital volunteering platform. And when we started, before COVID hit, we had maybe about, I don't know, 500-600 people registered on the platform. We hadn't really done a great job of kind of marketing it. But as soon as this kicked in, we had to find a way in which we were going to mobilize the volunteering effort that just literally exploded overnight in the city. It felt like hundreds of mutual aid support groups that had been set up just by local residents in local neighborhoods. And we had to look at ways in which we were going to safeguard, because as much as we wanted to embrace what was happening in local communities, we also had to make sure that those who might use those mutual aid online groups as a means to kind of undermine or take advantage of older residents, etc. So we put out a call and we asked all of the volunteers who were part of both the mutual aid movement as well as just the whole city that if they were interested in helping, then they should sign on to the platform. And literally, like within 24 hours, I think 3,000 people were added, and within a week, we now have nearly 9,000 people who are actually registered on the Can Do Bristol website. These are 9,000 people who are not ordinarily have any kind of relationship with the local authority or the city, other than through the kindness that they had expressed. So through that, we've delivered over nearly 5,000 volunteer actions, which include calls and visits made by vendors, shopping trips, prescription collections, dog walks. We also set up 22 community hubs to coordinate and support those activities, and those were distributed across the whole of the city. So I think every ward in the city had a hub, and the volunteers could actually relate to that. And in those areas where we didn't have a hub, we were using maybe our library buildings, because there are some areas where there is no community infrastructure in place. In terms of democracy, so that was a new one, and it took a little time. So at least for the first couple of months, we were having no online full council or cabinet meetings or planning meetings or anything like that, because we had to wait on government to pass the legislation to allow that to happen. But that didn't stop us as a cabinet. We were consistently meeting anyway prior informal cabinet meetings to ensure that the city was ticking over. But since then, we've held over 43 public council meetings that have taken place by Zoom, and we've been using the broadcast live. The public are able to ask questions and statements. In fact, we had full council last night, and we had quite a heavy agenda. A couple of technical hitches, but people managed to get in. We also have something called the City Gathering, where twice a year we bring together all of our city partners. And obviously, this was the first time we had used the Zoom technology, and it was a phenomenal success. In fact, a lot of people said that they felt it was one of the best ones that we did. And we had the Bishop of Bristol speaking at that event, historian David Olusoga, who happens to be a Bristol resident. And we also had Lord Bob Kerslake speaking to us about economy and recovery and what that's going to look like going forward. Social media has been like a Bible. It's been we've needed that, and we use that relentlessly. And so we have regular video updates from the mayor. He holds a fortnightly Facebook Live Q&A for up to an hour. We've delivered a number of video and social media campaigns, staying at home around domestic violence. We Are Bristol, City of Hope, and that was in response to the rise in race hate crimes that were happening in the city. And again, Are You OK? A safeguarding campaign that we set up to encourage people to check on their loved ones and make sure that people who may be living at home and are isolated are being looked after. So very clear messaging, using all of the platforms that we have to get our message across. Tackling digital exclusion was another biggie, because obviously one of the issues, particularly from older generation, in the conversations that we were having with the voluntary and community sector, clearly there are communities in the city who are not who we make assumptions that everybody is digitally included, but they're not. And particularly migrant and refugee communities, some Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, people who are living in kind of overcrowded, you know, a lot of people who are some of those frontline workers who have been on the front line kind of helping to fight the pandemic. So we had to find a different way in which we could also be as inclusive as we aim to be as a city. So we made sure that we wrote to every single one of our Bristol City Council tenants so that we could explain and provide information about what they needed to do around social distancing and how to get in contact with the council during COVID. We worked with the Muslim Strategic Leaders Group, a Somali Community Forum, and we produced a range of multilingual posters for businesses around social distancing, because we were having problems with some communities not really adhering to that. And instead of using the heavy arm of the police to get that resolved, for us it was really about information and going out and having those conversations, and that quickly turned around as soon as we put that into place. We also kept open our citizen service point in the city centre to allow any emergency cases to come in, obviously adhering to social distancing, washing hands, etc. And then finally, we worked with the Bristol Older People's Forum to co-produce a printed bulletin for older residents, and that went out to about 4,000 or 5,000 residents, and we will continue to do that going forward. I'm ending the screen share now, but I just want to, before I end, do I have any more time, Ishmael, 2 minutes?
Yes, you've got about 3 minutes.
Oh, good. Okay. So what I didn't put on screen, and again, it was because when Javier was speaking, I thought, oh, I've forgotten to write this down. So I'm going to tell you what else we did. We've done a phenomenal job in moving all of our library services online. You can do online storytelling. We've got virtual book clubs. We have seen, I think, triple the amount of ebooks and e-audio that has been downloaded from the site. Been a phenomenal uplift in membership. So whereas I think library membership had just, you know, steady state, we've seen a huge uplift in the number of new library members. And as we phase the opening, we are still retaining a lot of the online resources that we have there. We also created a new online platform around active travel. So in order for citizens to actually, a lot of people are getting quite frustrated about social distancing in their local neighborhoods and making sure that we put the appropriate measures in place. And so we have created an online digital map and platform, and local citizens can kind of put in their ideas about which roads and which streets that they think should be social, you know, be addressed. Obviously, the caveat is not everything you want you're going to get, because we obviously have to make sure that whatever is being put forward doesn't have unintended consequences, but it gives the citizens an opportunity to also be heard and for us to kind of consider what they need. We also are now about to launch a new deliberative democracy process. So we are going to be delivering online surveys, focus groups, and it will culminate in a citizens' assembly, no doubt online, depends on where we are towards the end of the year. And we are going to use this process over the next 6 months to feed into the recovery planning process. So even though we're going to be producing the recovery plan in September, we delivered a statement of intent, but this process will feed into the economy board, which is leading on the recovery process, so that they can also hear the voices of members of the public about what they see are their priorities about recovery going forward. And I know that this is a newbie for many, because I've been talking to other local authorities who haven't even thought about that. But for me, it has, as someone who leads on communities, it's really important that what we do up here, it has to relate to our citizens and people on the ground. The communities want to play their role, whether that's individually, in communities, in local neighborhoods. You know, how do we enable local citizens to deliver on the high level objectives that we've set out for ourselves in our One City plan? And this is an opportunity for us to kill quite a few birds with one stone through this recovery process. And then finally, we've also just turned, we have an award-winning leadership program called Stepping Up, which we set up specifically to increase the number of Black, Asian and minority ethnic senior leaders across the whole city. And we quickly had to, we're now on cohort 3, and we have now devised an amazing online, virtual online learning platform that we will also plan to roll out to other local authorities. A lot more I could say, a lot going on, but it just kind of gives you a flavour that it's local authorities who are at the coalface. We're the ones, it's place-based leadership that is going to get us out of this situation, and hopefully government may or may not kind of give us the reins and the resources to enable us to just get on and do what we need to do, as we have done already. There you have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. This has been a really fascinating and quite inspiring presentation, I think. This sense that we, you know, clearly we are in a moment of crisis and there's a moment of loss as well. But it is also seems to be a moment of creativity and reinvention, and actually the kind of initiatives that you've discussed, I imagine a lot of them will survive this crisis because they really, again, linking up to the sort of Xavier's presentation, they are linking the citizen and the institutions at an enormous level. And it does seem that compared to central government, local government has a capacity for that kind of collaboration and symbiosis that is really powerful. And in that sense, there's an agenda beyond crisis management and response that has been accelerated. And I think you've provided a fantastic example and lots of very concrete initiatives that hopefully will trigger some ideas in our participants. Which brings me now to my own presentation, which is to share the BookingLive experience. And let me just quickly check, and everyone see the slide there? Great, thank you. The background for us is that we are a tech company, and clearly at the heart of all these discussions, one of the things that has become very clear, certainly from your presentation, Asher, is the enabling power of technology well applied. And the fact that you also catered for those who were excluded so that you took everyone with you. But really that technology has that potential to go beyond sort of additionality into transformation. And in that respect, when the crisis hit, BookingLive, which was, I'll discuss in a second, asked itself, how can we play a part? How can we not just be a commercial player, but actually part of this movement, part of this community, part of this global search for answers and for change and interactions? And what I will share is some of the lessons that we have had from working with multiple local authorities in facing the challenges of this transformation and its opportunities, and what are perhaps the opportunities and the pain points. So there are two challenges that I think we face right now going forward. One is the recovery challenge. So millions of people, public services and businesses have suspended work. Millions at the cost of the economy to mental health is gigantic. So safely reopening the economy and our society depends on making services and venues COVID secure. And the way the government guidance has outlined this COVID security seems to be primarily about ensuring that as we reopen, the new normal, so to speak, allows us to maintain physical distance, to limit the number of people that individuals come into contact with, to change the shift patterns, to reduce occupancy, so you don't have everybody at once in the same building, in the same space, in the same side of the same building, and minimizing the need to physically queue to achieve some of those things. These seem to be the challenges ahead, because we're desperate now to go out. We're desperate to go out and to open. And I think here technology, again, can play a crucial role. And this is an area where we thought we in particular could help councils and businesses and society generally achieve these goals with minimum friction. The second challenge is the resilience challenge, the business continuity challenge. The pandemic, when it hit us, stretched the logistics of society to breaking point. We all had to improvise at speed. Organizations with advanced digital transformation already, and I think following from Asher's point, also with solid community engagement in place, that combination of the two, those authorities that had solid community networks and advanced digital transformation were the most able to be resilient to these changes. Those which were behind on this have continued to struggle. And as we move into reopening, it is important to recognize that this isn't behind us. Leicester obviously went back into lockdown, and we really don't know. This is an unknown map. So second waves, future crises, future lockdowns, and crises unlike the pandemic that we haven't been able to predict, have made us think about being prepared next time, not being caught sort of having to react and plan at the same time. So what does this mean? This means automating the processes for accessing essential public services. If your helplines get swamped, you're struggling. If you have to go physically to a venue to queue in order to access those services, you're at risk. And there are many other dimensions of this. Secondly, integrating fragmented supply chains for volunteers, staff, medical supplies, donations. So I am aware that this is something that certainly I've discussed with Asher in the past, but I'm sure it's familiar to all of you, that suddenly you were flooded with offers of solutions and equipment and resources which were vitally needed, but you did not have the bandwidth or the system to process them strategically or intelligently. So some places just went for the biggest players, etc. So we'll discuss it, but being able to be prepared in case this happens again, to engage all of society's solutions in a systematic way is another challenge. And lastly, freeing up staff from routine queries and non-essential duties to concentrate on emergency or complex queries. So these are the two areas where we identified we had a role to play. Who is BookingLive? We're an example of a tech company, one of your potential tech partners out of many of us who are there hoping to make a difference. We are concretely the #1 public sector booking, scheduling, and reservation provider. We have more than 11 now, product solutions for all kinds of elements of digital infrastructure. We also have created a free solution for SMEs and community groups to be able to fill that gap. And there is at the moment no real alternative. So it's really the only thing in town for that. And finally, we also have worked with very large corporates. So this gives you a range of the kind of people that we've worked with. This is the kind of experience that we're coming from. And this is what we were doing before the pandemic. When the pandemic came, we tried to use all of the experience of these interactions and the domain knowledge, so to speak, to identify how do we help you help the rest of society, including ourselves in that sense. So our experience was we basically hacked our systems to provide solutions as needs emerged. And there were a number of needs that we identified. So one I have mentioned already, public services automation. So running your pest control, your social housing maintenance, your libraries, your bulk waste collection, your registrars, your tree officers, childcare, taxi licensing, many of these services ground to a halt in many local authorities because there weren't the systems to allow interaction between the citizen and the authority without layers of now furloughed or home-based workers. So being able to automate these core public services so that the citizen can access them at all times, 24 hours, in very fine-grained ways was one area. Secondly, clearly appointments and training sort of become either are crucial or are restarting now. So a counselor might have a surgery, or you might have counseling services, or you might have advice services, or you might have staff training, especially now with health and safety, or equalities, or induction. And if again, people have to ring someone that has to be available at the time, being put on a waiting list, you are disenfranchising people at a very critical moment. So this was the other sort of broad area. Another area was capacity and density management. So how do you ensure that you don't have the scenes that we saw in beaches, in parks, with masses of people? Some private beaches used parking apps to try and manage this. Obviously, they were improvising. But so we've developed sort of approaches to do that, and we're looking to further innovate at a very sophisticated way with, university partners, etc., for that kind of density management for their high streets, etc. The other element of local authorities that we found was that you are points of contact. So in the Newport City Council, for example, when they wanted to help with the recovery of local businesses, rather than commission us directly, what they did was make our free solution available to the local business community. And we had a fantastic story of one tour guide whose business had collapsed, but through this free booking app was able to pivot from business to direct services, and then work with his industry to revive the entire tour industry in Wales during these initiatives. So being able to become mediators for technological innovation amongst your stakeholders in the community and business sector, not just direct providers, was the other area. And then the final set of things are, of course, rota management. How do you ensure that access to your council offices, that to your desks? Some hospitals, for example, have divide their staffing to one side of the room and the other side of the room. So being able to have that level of granularity where you can sort of plan the bookings of sort of very specific subspaces within your spaces was a big part of some of these collaborations. Online and physical events, again, facilitating that process, being able to just book and be connected onto your Zoom meeting or onto your citizen engagement session, hires and bookings of rooms, of sports facilities, etc., which again has to do with that social distancing, has to do with being able to predict traffic, has also been able to, all of this to give us data. And finally, the supply chain management solution that I mentioned, what made us come out top 10 globally in this global hack was creating a system whereby if a crisis comes again and you get 500 suppliers coming up to you coming up with solutions to you, we've created a system that means they can upload onto the system their offerings, and you can then decide which ones you take and then make them instantly available to the entire population at the click of a few buttons. So these were the kind of solutions that we worked. Now, what is our learning from collaborating with you? What is our core sort of findings here? What are the pain points? One was the ability of local authorities to react quickly. Some authorities were very excited by our solutions, but had issues around commissioning and procurement that made it difficult for them to be prepared to react quickly in a crisis. So they had to make do with incomplete solutions that either they themselves had created or they had co-opted because they didn't have time to go through those processes. So putting fast procurement, emergency procurement processes that can allow you to react quickly would be one of them. Secondly, overcoming fragmentation. Some of these solutions were adopted by one corner of a city council, but not by another, where actually would have made sense for the authority to be able to apply this approach across services. So integrating all that, and I've already talked about supply chains. And finally, the challenge of maintaining strategic focus. How do you not just react, but how do you engage partners like us in planning, because you don't know what you don't know, and obviously we don't know what we don't know. But if you could have tech partners in your strategic visioning of the direction of the city, then again, you're able to flow in a much more productive way. In terms of impact, I will finish with this. One very good example was Charnwood City Council, who did take a very strategic approach to our collaboration. And they looked at how they could use our system to automate their citizen interaction. And the impact was dramatic. They measured it and quantified it. This is their figures, not ours. And they found that sort of from something like 20 or 30%, 88% of orders moved online for bookings, for everything, showing that the demand in the citizen for that direct contact is there. A 68% reduction in calls, 50% reduction in administrative tasks and still rising, 29 hours reduction in advisors' resources, cost savings, and enormous customer satisfaction, citizen satisfaction. Average admin time saved per month, 16 hours. Average self-service bookings made per month, 94%. Average additional revenue generated from some of their initiatives, 36K. This is obviously just an illustration, but the point is that this is a very hard impact that gives you not just the ability to react, but to function in a more efficient way and to face the challenges of tightening budgets. So that's really where I wanted to kind of finish by saying that we are one example, and obviously our solutions may very well be exactly what you need, but we represent the tech sector more generally in that sense, and finding ways of interacting with our sector and involving us in thought leadership and in the process of policy making, not just in product commissioning, might be something that, that could help us both in the immediate recovery phase and in the long-term reopening phase. So, having finished my presentation, I will give time for us to ask questions and contribute points. But I wanted to take this opportunity to learn from the participants. And so we're going to ask 3 questions, very brief questions. And we would like you, if you feel able to post your response on the chat screen. If you can see your chat screen is sort of it should be at the bottom right, I think, of your interface. Let me stop sharing. And this is the opportunity to learn from you. And we will take your input and combine it with the input from the speakers. We also hope to run this internationally to gain further data. And then we will create a report that we will feed back to you so that you can find something useful immediately in this. But the first question that I'd like you to answer is the following. What was your biggest challenge in sourcing and implementing digital solutions during lockdown? If you'd be able, I'm just going to give you 2-3 minutes to write something and put it on chat with your local authority, what local authority you represent or work with. Thank you. Getting the IT to staff. Lack of IT equipment.
Ismail, I guess another way of looking at this question as well is during the actual procurement of these solutions, were they pre-existing or did you have to go through a process to get hold of those? And what was the experience of that?
Thank you. Mobilizing IT for home working. And I'm aware behind these one lines, there's a world of effort and pain and innovation for you guys. So I know there are serious life stories in here. Fixed budgets and lack of equipment, also procurement and inflexibility of contracts and processes to reprocure. Thank you. This is very useful data. Time imperative, needed to reshape services with sudden high demand whilst moving online at pace. Yes, we experienced that a lot in our conversations. I think it's been described as trying to whistle and sing at the same time. And I take the opportunity actually just as a citizen to thank you all, because your efforts really have saved our lives and made our ability to function possible. And you've had to do this at the same time as dealing yourselves with the crisis, so thank you. Inefficient two-way communications. Reluctance from staff to adapt to sudden change and ways of working. Lack of digital confidence. That's a really interesting point. All of this is obviously so significant in terms of crisis preparedness for the next challenges that we face. Moving out the transformation program from 3 years to 3 days. Issues of laptops to staff for home working plus upgrade of the network to cope with up to 1,500 staff working remotely. Wow. I really hope some of these stories get written down in detail at some point, because I think, yeah, it shows us at our best beside our biggest challenges, really. I'm going to give it one more minute to this question. Wow, yeah, when IT went down, impact was high and immediate. Belfast City Council data gaps lead to difficulties in knowing what problems we are addressing. Digital solutions were offered, but lack of data on need due to fast-moving nature of the pandemic. That was one also that actually was relevant to our discussions, the ability to be able to provide data as people do use these apps and develop a sort of evidence-based decisions very quickly was one of this. The number of staff who do not have access to laptops, particularly manual workers and frontline care staff. So identifying actually the profiles of staff that we need to empower in these ways. And also the significance of mobile solutions as well, of being able to provide mobile first channels. Not having a plan B, C, when plan A didn't work. I wonder at the moment, because my impression of conversations is that the reaction time remains, the pressures on you remain so high that I wonder whether we now have plan Bs and Cs or we're still not there yet. Southwark having to think digital as well as act digital. We did well, but a challenge when under stress and supporting vulnerable residents. That's a very good point, that the kind of transformations involved are not just practical, but actually of outlook, of mentality, of interaction. And that people are not all in the same sort of moment of change and familiarity. Feel free to keep those coming. I'm going to move on to the next question. The next question is, what are your top priorities for digital transformation in the recovery second wave stage? I put them together because we don't know if we will have a second wave, but we can prepare for those. So in the next phase that we're entering now of recovery and second wave, what are your top priorities for digital transformation? So another challenge was using council systems that are by design open only to certain people and generally not accessible by citizens and other partners. Indeed. And I think those are the systems that we identified as the ones that ground to a halt when the pandemic struck. And those were actually some of the top priorities around our collaborations to assist with those transformations. I'm hoping people have some priorities for transformation in this second recovery. Better information for citizens, mobile hardware for colleagues, portals to support integration of communication with partners and citizens. That's really interesting and echoes a lot of what Asher's presentation identified. Embed digital solutions going forward. By and large, the response worked well and IT was resilient. It is important that we retain the learning and embed in future waves. Maybe when we open the panel, I'd love to understand more what you mean by embedding those digital solutions. Managing the events booking processes with the arts, creative and festival sectors who are demanding quick turnarounds from the event management teams. Actually, these things, it's amazing. They can be life or death for these sectors, really. So, and that's a good example of, for example, where the council acted not just as provider, but as mediator. So when Newport made our solution available free of charge and sort of did a public information campaign for vulnerable sectors, it meant that they didn't necessarily have to provide those solutions, but were able to broker them for a very quick turnaround. Obviously, it's not suitable for everyone, but that general approach would seem to be relevant to that priority. using digital to respond to behavior change in light of a world with COVID. That's extremely, extremely valuable. One of the things that we were exploring around the population density management with the University of Liverpool was to be able to actually map the behavior, the observance, the compliance, the hotspots in real time of whole populations in our cities, identify which are the areas that are safest, the areas that need most attention, etc. But being able to identify and map and react to behavior change seems crucial. A realization that colleagues who work well in supervised office situations also work well remotely. Interesting learning for our system in terms of trusting staff to work under their own supervision. I know that's been one of the processes our company has gone through as well. We were lucky to already have remote working in place, and being a tech company being kind of suited to it, but there has still been, I think, a lot of learning around those culture changes and the possibilities, and how some people didn't work well remotely and some people thrive remotely, and being able to sort of provide a new vision of work going forward to maximize that. I'm going to give 1 more minute for this question, and then I'll move to the last question. Rapid connection with the voluntary and community sector who have been crucial to the volunteering effort across the city. That's been also something that's come up with us across multiple authorities, particularly moving from many authorities very successful at recruiting volunteers digitally, but have faced a lot of challenges around deploying and follow-up across very fragmented networks. So that's another of the areas of sort of empowering that sector with those tools as well. So the last question is, what positive impacts do you foresee in the next 6 months from digital transformation? So this is going back now to the big picture that Xavier gave us, the big picture, the examples and inspiration from Bristol. Out of all of these challenges, as you face all the problems that may come and all the transformations, how do you see your council changing and your communities changing positively from digital transformation?
This one to me, Ishmael, is one of the key things when we're working with these local authorities is understanding the starting point of what success looks like, having the top priorities for digital transformation and understanding the sort of tech stack and the more detail orientated side of it is great. But more often than not, we do struggle to gain that information from them on what success looks like for them over this next 6 months, and how we as tech suppliers can become a part of that journey alongside them and support them with that goal. I think that if suppliers and tech suppliers in particular can align themselves with that goal and idea of success to begin with, it makes for far more successful projects and implementation.
Thank you. That's a really important point, that sort of being able to have a strategic view of this and not just what you're trying to get away from, but what you're wanting to go toward, and also the involvement of people with the technical knowledge to be able to tell you what else is possible in that respect. The removal of historical duplication in systems and procedures. That sounds like that could be potentially significantly impactful and transformative for any local authority. Time saved through online meetings and training, more services accessible than before, modernizing our more traditional councillors. And along similar lines, digital democracy. This has enabled people who would not ordinarily engage with the council and city structures. So that closer link between local authority and local community, and that wider accessibility through these platforms, and being able to get the best of both worlds. We've had the best of one and then the best of the other, but being able to get the best of both worlds Sounds indeed exciting and promising. More IT educated, agile teams, greater productivity, taking into account individual nature of staff and customer needs. That's fantastic. This sort of change of culture, really, and therefore of capacity and of productivity, and also as an environment to work in, as in a local authority, as well as a service to deliver to the citizens, to the staff and the customers, and having that individualized approach as well. Thank you. Use of data about people who have not previously had contact with the council to both harness offers of support and respond to requests for help. Links to wider network on building community capacity and social support. I think this pandemic showed the significance of this. I don't think we ever really, it was a very nice extra, but at this point, the ability to actually crowdsource solutions and to respond at scale was both one of the great gifts, but also one of the great challenges, and developing that plan A and plan B for ensuring that that can happen at scale and putting the systems in place seems crucial. And in Southwark, an opportunity to rethink service design and delivery, achieving greatest impact on highest need, and being agile in how we use the skills of our excellent staff to do less process and more people, i.e. learning from ability to respond quickly at scale to COVID impacts. And that's a fantastic thing, is how it's extrapolating from this COVID experience to a vision of service, to rethinking service design and delivery. That is fantastic. So again, feel free to keep them coming. In the meantime, I'd like to open up the floor to anyone who would like to ask any question or make a comment or share an experience. You can raise your hand, you can message on the chat, and I'll gladly give you voice. So if anybody has any questions or queries, use the Zoom's ability to raise a hand, or just say, I'd like to speak on chat, and I'll sort of give you the microphone. Meanwhile, looking forward also to the stronger digital infrastructure now in place to effectively and efficiently respond to our community and resident needs in ongoing and future emergencies.
I've got a question for Xavier here. Out of all of those points that we've just had come through on the chat, are those resonating with you and what you're seeing on a global scale within the EU and wider? Are these the same sort of themes that are coming out, or is there anything new that you think has been missed through those points?
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic. You know, I was in a way enjoying, you know, seeing this, because I think it's a fantastic illustration of yes, what's going on. You know, the sort of challenges and needs and opportunities that we're seeing, you know, across the globe from different constituencies. You know, one point I think was raised by Belfast that I thought it was really interesting is the fact that even in cases where you have digital solutions at hand, there are still challenges, you know, on how to apply those digital solutions. It goes back to, you know, not knowing, you know, the unknowns, you know, on maybe, you know, applying this digital solution. And when we look at the developing world, you know, there is a lot that, you know, can be contributed from the experience in, you know, in Europe or in America. But then it's not a natural match. You know, there needs to be an infrastructure built around those digital solutions for them to really have an impact. And it goes back to also some of the feedback, you know, on staff being trained, on you know, decision makers being familiar with, you know, those solutions. So it's so I guess, I mean, I guess it's stating the obvious, but sometimes, you know, having the solution doesn't resolve the problem necessarily. You know, you still have to make that solution work. And I think a lot of what we're seeing here and what we're seeing in many parts of the world is precisely this, you know, that you have loads of, whether, you know, small entrepreneurs or large corporations, you know, trying to help. But then, you know, that connection between, let's say, service providers, institutions, you know, public institutions, the private sector and the citizens themselves, you know, if those connections are not working, then you know, we still have a problem. You know, we still need we still need solutions, you know, to resolve those issues. Even when the technology is there, when the IT is there, you still face those solutions. I think it's fascinating to see indeed how I'm quite sure. I mean, from what I'm hearing, if you ask these same questions, you know, in other parts of the world, you would get, you know, similar answers as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think that we have experienced that previously, where really successful projects, we work with some of those sort of key master vendors, the likes of Capita and Arcus and Insight, and those big organizations that manage digital transformation. And more often than not, the more successful projects that go through are ones where local authorities have come out and promoted problems rather than procuring a product, where they're asking the market what solutions are there to these problems, whether that's through roundtables or just generally soft market testing. There's really great ways of engaging with the sort of the business world to find new solutions that you may not be aware of yet.
Thank you, Sam. And I think on that note, I haven't had any hands raised or any requests, any questions on the chat. So I'd like to then sort of begin to close by saying that moving forward, it's been a fantastic thing. We're very grateful as BookingLive for the time that the speakers have shared, and we're very grateful to the participants for sharing their experiences as well as attending. And as I say, we hope to provide a report. We hope to have an international equivalent of this to draw on broader perspective. Our hope with this was to have a social impact, to be able to kind of, I feel that there's not yet been enough learning from one another. So to begin that process of conversation and learning, to offer ourselves as well as a resource, not just sort of commercially with our solutions, but also in terms of thinking more strategically about how local authorities transform, because that also helps us obviously understand how best to be, you know, an actor, a responsible actor in this current social challenge. So I will now sort of let Sam sort of bid us farewell. And on my part, thank you all very, very much for your contributions, both sort of on the chat and as speakers. Sam.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, thank you to all of the speakers that have come on today. We really do value that. I've been frantically taking notes as we've been going, and we will collate this into a report that we'll send out to the attendees as well as the panelists, so that everyone has that learning. If anybody is interested in seeing case studies of some of the solutions that that Ismail mentioned earlier, this Thursday we will be doing that as well. So we'll run through another session for people that are interested, showing actually what these solutions look like and how they look and feel. So we'll send that invite over to you guys via email after this, so you have access to it. But as always, we are a hand outreach offering assistance at any stage of your exploration of digital transformation. If we aren't the right provider, we have a very good network of trusted solutions out there that will point you in the right direction. And we're here to be of any assistance that we possibly can. So thank you very much for everyone attending, and we look forward to sending out the reports. We'll invite you all to the international event if you wanted to be sort of a witness to that as well. And thank you very much for attending, and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon.